Hi, friends. This is Donniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi from the Shalom Hartman Institute, and this is our podcast, For Heaven's Sake, Israel at War, Day 606. Today, however, we don't want to talk about Israel at war because we and Jews in North America are now feeling a different war, and that is nothing less than the war against the Jews. Now, as our audience knows, I have a natural aversion about not so much talking about anti-Semitism, but overemphasizing the impact of anti-Semitism and its significance and its prevalence. But I think it's time that I come to terms with the fact that our audience and the Jews that we meet around North America have been saying something that we need to start talking about on a different level. Because it's not anymore violent speech or attacks on social media or something that someone on campus hears that makes them feel uncomfortable or threatened. In Boulder and in Washington, Jews died and were critically injured simply because they were Jews. And even though, ostensibly, and we're going to talk about this, the attackers spoke about free Palestine. Also, the attack against the governor of Pennsylvania on the eve of Pesach. Again, free Palestine. This violence is now being normalized. Now, I don't want to claim, and it's important that we not claim, that this is becoming like Germany of 1930s. This is not state-sponsored, and it's not that all of society hates us and that everybody out there wants to kill the Jews. But it's being normalized. Violence against us is being normalized, and it's changing the nature of Jewish life. Because you can't go to any Jewish group today, a Jewish meeting, or even walking outside in the street. I just came back from North America, and every place I went, I was wearing my kippah. You don't know. You don't know if you're going to get attacked. And it doesn't mean that everybody hates you, but it's sufficient that there are 25 people out of the 350 million North Americans who are going to decide to act on their anti-Semitic impulse. Every 2 weeks, it gets normalized. And we know that it feeds each other. It's not paranoia. There's a real fear. There's a real fear that is legitimate, and it feels that we are being attacked. It's a different type of attack. And in our podcast, Israel at War, they're connected or not connected. That's part of what we're going to talk about. There's now an experience of war against the Jews, which is changing the experience of North American Jewish life. And, you and I, Yossi, we have multiple identities. We are American. I grew up in Canada. We're both Israeli Jews. For the last 30, 40 years, we have worked with both communities, communicating Israel to North American Jews, North American Jewish life to Israeli Jews. But even on a deeper level, we are shaped by both of these realities. Anti-Semitism has shaped our lives differently, but both of us are North Americans and Israelis in a very deep sense, and our people. Our existence, our life is being changed. And what does it mean? And how do we deal with this? We have to talk. And so in this reality where violence against Jews is being normalized, how do you understand this anti-Semitism, this moment?
Well, first of all, Donniel, this hits both of us in a very visceral place. There's nothing abstract about attacks against the American Jewish community for either of us, for the reason that you just laid out. Just recently, I spoke in a synagogue in Denver, and a large contingent of Jews came from Boulder to attend the event. And I immediately thought of them. One of my friends, Bruce Schaefer, has been an organizer of this vigil, and he happened to be in Israel when it happened. But my first impulse was to reach out to Bruce. Are you okay? People you know. And of course, he knew everyone. And so that's just on the most basic level. This hits me in a particularly tender place. And the love that I feel for the American Jewish community, the extraordinary gifts that the Jewish people has received from this community, and the vulnerability of this community now is very painful for me. And we as an institute, we live on that fault line, which for us is not a fault line. It enriches who we are. But for many people in Israel and American Jewry, the relationship is experienced as a fault line. And the Hartman Institute sits exactly on that place of creative tension between these two very, very different Jewish communities. So then we need to make the shift, right, from the emotional, reactive place to really trying to understand this moment. And maybe because we're not just American Jews or coming from the American Jewish community, but because we're Israelis, primarily Israelis, for me for the last 40 years, gives us a certain measure of perspective. And it's so important what you said, that we not go into Holocaust default mode. It's not the 1930s. Certainly not 1930s Europe. If it does, God forbid, become the 1930s in America, it will be the American 1930s, which was a very uncomfortable place for Jews. But it was not the 1930s.
But even that, if I could stop you, in the 1930s, there it was normalized statewide, even if not state-sponsored, but normalized anti-Semitism. This is not an anti-Semitism of Christianity in a broader sense.
No, and it's really interesting to bring that comparison up, Donniel, because what was happening in the United States in the 1930s, even as anti-Semitic movements were becoming popular and drawing actually millions of supporters, the first seeds were being planted of what later became the Jewish-Christian interfaith relationship in the 1930s. So America has been different from the beginning. And in fact, there's this fantastic story. The Constitution is being ratified in the late 18th century, and there's a celebratory march in Philadelphia. And leading the march are Jewish and Christian clergy, arms linked, in the late 18th century. So it's really important, I think, before we get into this conversation, to emphasize that America has always been different. And even now, I believe that America still is different. Having said that, what's so terrifying...
Now we could begin.
not yes, to quote your Portnoy's complaint, the last line after he's sitting with his psychiatrist, and the whole book is Portnoy pouring out his heart. Okay, and now let us begin.
Right.
So, where we begin is what a terrifying moment this is for American Jews. That what they're feeling, and the image that American Jews are using, is a pincer. They're being threatened by the far right, which is growing. Anti-Semitism is taking deep root in these enormously popular podcasts, Joe Rogan and others, when anti-Semitism is being normalized, along with anti-Zionism, by the way, which is new on the right. And so when a swastika is painted on a synagogue, Jews don't know whether it's a right-wing swastika celebrating Nazism or a left-wing swastika accusing us of being Nazis. This is where American Jews are. Now, until the last weeks, as you put it, it was still conceptual. It was still in the realm of hateful speech. And there were Jews warning from October 8th, from the beginning, saying this hateful speech is going to lead to the murder of Jews. And when you say globalize the Intifada, it means physical violence against diaspora Jews. Now, in Europe, Jews have lived with this for 50 years. There's nothing surprising about this. But what I think we're experiencing now is the Europeanization of American Jewish life. And we've been seeing the gradual transformation of American Jewry from this safe,
privileged
community that felt it was living a Jewish version of American exceptionalism. American Jewry was the great exception in Jewish history, and it feels much less so since October 7th, and especially now.
It's interesting, the comparison. See, I still feel, and I want to go back to your remarks beforehand, that America still is different. And Canada is going through some serious changes. And I don't, it could be that things are more uncomfortable for Canadian Jews.
There are fewer of them. They feel
that's the
far
point.
more
So that's
vulnerable.
why the American Europeanization is Jews in America are still more powerful.
Yeah.
And the allies of the Jews are still the dominant group in America. But fear. I don't think America's French, but fear. And not paranoid fear and not over-exaggerated fear, a real reality. I send my kids to school, I go to shul, I wear a kippah. And it's not somebody just shouting and, calling you some anti-Semitic slur. Now, what does it take to throw a Molotov cocktail? What does it take, in America with the prevalence of guns, what does it take to shoot a Jew? So it's what's remarkable also, Yossi, is how dominant something could be as an experience, even though it's not necessarily predominant as an empirical reality.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you're exaggerating. I'm not. That's the way terror works. Terror works, it once a month gets you. It's the war against the Jews or it's the terrorizing of the Jews in this reality. So, and I think in that sense, your comparison to Europe is real. It's, whenever you go to Europe, you feel very, very different. The Israeli security forces always have told us now for years, don't wear Jewish symbols in public in Europe. But in America, why shouldn't I wear a Jewish symbol?
Would you reconsider wearing a kippah in America?
In certain places, probably yes. The airports, no. Where security is clear. See, I'm not afraid of institutional anti-Semitism. I was just, for example, I was in Toronto or North Carolina, and I'm being checked in Toronto by a woman with a hijab. And in North Carolina, I was the only kippah in this vast, huge airport, walking from one gate to the I realized that I'm the only one. I realized that there's you're something a little strange about you. But that I was frightened, not for a moment. But if I was walking now in the streets of Washington, maybe Manhattan is different, given but you never know now. It's not that the street isn't safe. It's that there are actors who are now normalizing this expression of murderous intent, and you never know. So this not knowing, that's the power of terror. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I don't. But I don't think the problem is only or even primarily the very small numbers of people on the left, on the right, from the Muslim community who are going to physically attack Jews. I think the problem is more the ideological context that's being created, where in some ways the Jews are no longer quite legitimate. And when you compare Israel routinely to Nazi Germany, the American Jewish community, which has Israeli flags on its synagogue bimas, are somehow pro-Nazi, are surrogate Nazis. Yes, they shouldn't be attacked because they're American citizens. We don't want violence in American society. But they're not quite innocent either. That's the vibe now.
Here, so let me push you for a second, Yossi, on that. See, because there is a little difference between us. I believe that what's changed are these 50 people. And there might be more than 50. There might be 500. There might be 5,000. Maybe that's my aversion from the beginning. It's not the larger story. I think what's changed, it's like, I see this as like the Houthi missiles. Every day or two, we get this notification on our telephone, tells us, okay, go, and you have a minute and a half. And my grandson, in my daughter's home, their safe room is in one of my granddaughter's rooms. So my little baby grandson, he doesn't know we're going to a safe room. We're going to Mia's room. He hears the sirens. Hi, we have to run to Mia's room. He has no idea. But it's like it's normalized. It's just like it's a normal thing that we're doing. But, one missile, still to this day, the airlines haven't returned. There's something, it's just there, and it just changes the way you live. But in that context, and let me give you a platform. You'll take it anyway, but I'm going to offer it to you. How did you understand this moment of anti-Semitism. You're saying it's not just the 5,500, and I agree. I know it's bigger than that. I know, but I'm saying what's changing the existential reality is this normalized violence. But you're saying it's something bigger. So how do you understand this new manifestation of anti-Semitism? Because it's not anti-Semitism from the right. This is primarily anti-Semitism, predominantly anti-Semitism. I don't know what I call Islamic left. I don't know. So I don't know if right and left even makes sense. But please, there's also a difference between Boulder and Washington, where they came from and what distorted Torah they grew up on. But how do you understand this?
Well, one of the differences between the assault on the Jews that's coming from the left and the assault that's coming from the right is that it's very important for the left to present its animus toward Jews as different from classical anti-Semitism. Coming from the right, there's a certain shamelessness, which I actually prefer because it's more honest. Yes, we hate Jews, and you control the banks and the media and the world economy, and there's something I would say more refreshing about the.
Here, let's just share our honest. We just had a moment of humor talking about refreshing anti-Semitism. That's just look the word we're living. We're living in. Please continue.
What
Yossi.
troubles me so much about left-wing anti-Semitism, besides the obvious, is its disingenuousness and the contortions that it goes through to try to show that it isn't part of a historical pattern of singling out the Jews as the world's great criminals. For me, that's classical anti-Semitism, and I've said this on our podcast several times, that for me, anti-Semitism is turning the Jew into the symbol of whatever a given civilization defines as its most objectionable qualities, and we're seeing that happen to the Jewish state. If the Jewish state becomes Nazi Germany, then that fits a very uncomfortable pattern. Now, before we get into the question of what power has done to us, and this is something you and I have talked about a lot on this podcast, and we need to talk about it in this context as well, I just want to play this out a little bit more. And there was a statement that was released by CARE, one of the main Muslim American organizations, denouncing the attack in Boulder as a heinous crime, and then inevitably segueing to but the but is well, and the first but is, let's not forget what Israel is doing, but the bigger but here for CARE is, don't taint the anti-genocide movement with the violent actions of a few extremists. Now, listen to that language. That language in itself tells us that this problem is much bigger than a few extremists. And by calling the movement to stop the Gaza war an anti-genocide movement, you are pointing the finger to one of the main problems, one of the main sources of this time, which is the routinization of Israel as the world's great criminal. And this is a moment, by the way, Donniel, and this, it's something that really sits heavily with me. The Muslim American community is facing a moment of truth right now. And is it capable of condemning unequivocally, without the but, violence against their fellow American citizens? Let's just put it on that most basic, primal civic level. Can you stand with your fellow citizens unequivocally? And from what I see in the American in the American Muslim community, they're not necessarily passing this test. And Donniel, you know where this is coming from. I've worked personally with the Muslim American community for the last decade. We as an institution have passionately embraced the Muslim-Jewish connection as essential to our 21st century mission as an institution. And beginning with October 7th and culminating now, there's this sense of fundamental rupture, similar to, again, what's happened in Europe between Muslims and Jews, which makes this all the more personally devastating for me.
I want to relate to some of the things that you said, and I haven't spent a lifetime like you analyzing and thinking about anti-Semitism. I don't know if I was even allowed to, but
by your father.
Yeah, my mother was always very, very sensitive to the dangers of anti-Semitism. When I look at this moment, and you spoke about right-wing anti-Semitism and left-wing anti-Semitism. I don't know if this will be helpful. You're the better judge of this. Classic right-wing anti-Semitism is an anti-Semitism against Jews for what we did or for the essence of who a Jew is, who we are. Either we were Christ killers, and I always had difficulty even responding. Christianity starts 300 years after the death of Jesus. Let's say Jews were responsible. I never understood why this was such a big issue. Like, who is out there, who's an anti-Roman right now because of the murder and devastation that the Romans brought onto Europe? Or even who now is calling for the killing of or the discrimination against Germans for what happened just 2 generations ago, as a colleague of mine said to me today, Alon Shalev. He was like, what is this hatred in the past? And that's one of the reasons why I always saw anti-Semitism as a manifestation of the human capacity for evil. Precisely these reasons. This is the reason? Like, we killed, this is what's motivating it? Or the second manifestation of anti-Semitism on the right is not what we did, but what is the essence of the Jew? You call it the embodiment of evil and corruption, of the evil du jour. That's your language. But this whole notion of the Jew as something ugly and vulgar. It's who we are. And false, doesn't matter. It was being a minority. It was always easy to manifest your impulse to evil and express it through hatred of Jews. The anti-Semitism from the left, which we're seeing today, I think has a different quality to it, because it's not about who we are as Jews, and it's not what we did, it's what we're doing. The justification for it is, look what Jews are doing now. And that makes it, as you said, much more complicated. Because Jews, whether we are committing genocide in Gaza or not, we are killing civilians. Is it a fine legal debate, what we do or don't do? That's a separate issue. But we are doing something. We are at war. We have killed roughly 50,000 people. Many of them Hamas terrorists. It might have been a war that was just, even though the anti-Semites don't recognize it. But it's not calling us, it's not growing out of the Nakba. It's not talking about 1947. It's not even talking about the occupation. Even that could still continue. It's about this war now. And it's growing out of a response which makes it, as you said, far more complicated, because it could shield its anti-Semitic impulses. It could deny it. And we also know that not everybody who's critiquing Israel is an anti-Semite either. So it's a far more complicated, subversive, and difficult. And it's difficult even for those who are feeling it, because when you paint all of them as anti-Semites, I'm not an anti-Semite. Many of our Muslim graduates who graduated from our program, they're not anti-Semites. They never were anti-Semites. But there is something about this demonization of Israel. There is a language which is being used about Israel's war, and everybody knows how critical I am. But still, there is that level of demonization of what's taking place. That's a unique feature of the left as distinct from right-wing. And I'm going to ask you too, one comment on that distinction and more. Does it make a difference? Because at the end, hatred is hatred is hatred. Murder is murder is murder. If it does grow out of something we do, are there any responsibilities we have?
Yeah,
because in the past I said, if it's what we did, I can't do tshuva for maybe some Jews killing Creed. Like, what do you want from me? But now,
yeah, right.
Does it obligate us to maybe look at what we're doing?
It's a really important question, because what we're hearing from the left is actually, in the end, not that dissimilar from what we're hearing from the right. And increasingly, it's not about what Israel does, but what Israel is. And there is
interesting.
And there is a spectrum of criticism here. We've said this over and over, Donniel. Criticism of Israel's actions is not only is it not anti-Semitic, but when it comes from our friends, we are obligated to take that criticism seriously and to examine ourselves, examine our actions. But the problem of this moment is that there is all kinds of criticism and they're being conflated. And so much of what we're hearing from the left is not criticism of Israel's actions. And the spectrum is Israel is committing war crimes. The war itself is a crime. Israel itself is a crime. That's the progression on the left. And, you know, when you think about the reaction to October 7th, I mean, what did we hear? Even from people who are not necessarily anti-Israel, there was this kind of discomfort with wholly embracing the Israeli narrative of October 7th. Well, let's not forget the occupation. President Obama said it immediately after October 7th, and many others. And the implication was, okay, Hamas went too far and it was a crime, but the Jews in some way brought this on themselves. Now, that was not at all the Israeli perception of October 7th, including on the Israeli left. Virtually all Israeli Jews saw October 7th not as the reaction of an occupied people to oppression, but of an assault by radical Islamism against the existence of a Jewish state in any borders. And that's why virtually all of Israeli Jewish society came together on October 8th in support of this war. We haven't seen that level of unanimity around the justness of a war, of an asymmetrical war, of brutal war, maybe since the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. And so this big disconnect between Israel and much of the world began on October 8th, and over the question of, did we bring October 7th on ourselves? And the same question is being raised today over the violent anti-Zionism that American Jews are experiencing. Okay, it's terrible, but maybe the fact that you're marching with an Israeli flag in Boulder, maybe you're not so innocent. You're identifying with genocide.
Could I try something on you? And since this podcast is just a private conversation and it's off the record, but I want to try something.
Funnily enough, it does feel that way sometimes.
I don't want to get into trouble. But I want to try something on you. And I'm not sure I agree with it, but I want to say it. When somebody raises their hands against a member of my people, when somebody engages in anti-Semitic acts of violence, I've said this before, I have no desire to understand your motives. All I want to do is to defend myself and use every aspect of power that I have access to limit you. If it's in Israel, to kill you. If you're coming to kill me, to defend myself. And if it's to use soft power, whatever power and influence I have, to marginalize you, to limit your ability, to find the oxygen you need to feed your hatred. Let's just simple. October 7th does not grow out of an occupation. October 7th, anybody who engages in October 7th is not somebody who's combating an occupation. It's somebody who wants to kill Jews and destroy the state of Israel. It's not 1967. It's not 2003 or 5. It's 1947. It's the delegitimization of Israel and any rights that the Jewish people have to sovereignty. That's clear. But in this environment of, let's call it the left discourse, there is a spectrum of anti-Semitisms that I want us to be aware of. And while I can't take any responsibility to try to save this Egyptian or this Latino man who all feel that we are the embodiment of evil, there is an evil in their soul that has given them legitimacy to kill or to engage in an act of violence, there is no but. At the same time, not but about their violence, but there is another spectrum of anti-Semites that are emerging. I want to call them soft anti-Semites, or even marginal anti-Semites, or maybe even questionable anti-Semites, who are living in a world of discourse in which the demonization of Israel is mainstream. And they feel it. Yes, they feel that Israel's committing genocide. And by the way, it is this larger community that serves as the conceptual framework to normalize the actions of the extreme. Now, the extreme only act, they don't act alone, even though they're lone wolves. They need a context in which their behavior is seen as legitimate. And this vilification of Israel, this inability to even consider that, yes, maybe even if you want to argue Israel's committing genocide, that it is from nothing, that there is no complexity, there's no responsibility of Hamas in the story, all of the above. It's a simple story. Simple story. But when there is a group there is a discourse that I believe we have also helped to create. I'm not taking responsibility for anti-Semitism, but there is something new emerging that hasn't emerged in the past. And maybe it was there. Maybe it's the same as the radical, violent anti-Semite. And we in Israel have, I believe, engaged in the worst type of military campaign. Not in our right to defend ourselves, but we haven't even tried to create a moral discourse and a moral aspiration with which to explain. Nobody even knows. When is the last time the Israeli government even explained barely what it's doing in Gaza? It's as if we're, not as a public relations campaign, there is this whole universe that we are basically giving over to the vilifiers of Israel. And what I believe that one of the things that Israel needs to do is we have to take responsibility for the reality that we are creating, which is endangering parts of our people around the world. It has to be one of the considerations we think about when we think about how we engage in moral discourse. And I don't want to go on, but there are so many things that the prime ministers and the leaders of Israel could have said to alleviate any concern that we in fact want to occupy Gaza, that we want to banish the people, that we don't care about starvation. Now, all of this is feeding the environment. And in that sense, we're not responsible for the anti-Semite, and we're not responsible for the choosing to vilify and demonize everything that we're doing and flatten the conversation. But at the same time, this is not some distortion of the past. We had to have done, and still to this day, have to act differently if we're going to be able to reclaim a moral place for Israel and for Israel's supporters. So did I cross a line, Yossi? I don't know. In the middle, I was ambivalent about myself.
Yeah, the only question that I have, Donniel, and I suspect this is your question as well, is whether this is a moment to raise that, and whether we should be, at least for a moment, pausing that question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And
that's not my consideration, you should know. Because I'm never worried about the moments, because these moments become eternal. They become norms. That's yours. That's your feeling. Yeah. If I have any hesitation, I hate taking any risk. I don't believe that you cause evil. So that's my hesitation. But we are causing decent people who aren't evil to move to a place, and then they enter a spectrum of anti-Zionist, quasi-anti-Semitism.
I think that's a really important point. And, power, the Jewish reclamation of power, which you and I have repeatedly celebrated as the means for the Jewish people's ability to protect itself and to heal from the past, brings with it responsibilities and more than that, to quote a Donnielism, it complexifies this period that we're living through, where on the one hand, we feel increasingly ambivalent about what the Israeli government is doing, and on the other hand, increasingly vulnerable and outraged against the growing anti-Semitism from both left and right. Maybe I'll take the last word here, even though you
got it.
Even though you
and
haven't
I will give it
offered
to you.
me.
No, I will give you the last word, conditional on what you say. Go.
Yeah, right. So the question really of this particular moment, the most urgent question that I hear is, do the Jews bring this on themselves? And of course, power makes this moment more complicated. And as you said, there are dead babies in Gaza, which the IDF has inadvertently killed. And for me, that's the crucial word. But nevertheless, accusations against us are no longer entirely invented. We knew in the past that we didn't kill Jesus. We knew that
it didn't matter.
Or that
or who cares?
Yeah. And we knew that we don't use the blood of Christian children to bake matzah. And so
that we knew.
and we knew that accusations against the Jews were entirely malicious and invented. And the accusations now are more complicated. But at what point do those who accuse have to start examining themselves and say, maybe the accusations are too sweeping, and maybe we are inadvertently repeating historical patterns that are deeply uncomfortable? And, there was something I saw on my social media feed, and this is actually, I've seen variations of this since October 7th, which is, look at the chosen people. And you just feel this almost unconscious welling up of decades of Western resentment against the Jews for the Holocaust. There was a German Jewish journalist, Henrik Broder, who famously said, the Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz. And it's a brilliant insight.
Sure.
And there's this deep sense of, you've put all this guilt on us for the Holocaust, and we just can't wait to throw this back into your face. And
Yossi,
it's a gotcha moment.
It's a gotcha moment. I'm giving you the last word with just one small caveat, but not about you, but I want to maybe refine something in light of what you said. Because I'm not saying that the Jews have brought it upon ourselves. I'm asking whether it's some of our responsibility to be part of the solution. That Jews around the world are being threatened in a new way. And by just simply claiming, like at the old anti-Semitism, there's nothing you can do, it's just evil. I think Israeli policies have to think about multiple things, and maybe we have to talk about this another time. We have to worry about the security and safety of Israel. We have to worry about defeating Hamas. We have to worry about geopolitical affairs. We have to literally secure all of the above. One of the calculations we have to think about is not whether we're bringing upon ourselves hatred. Let's put all the blame at the anti-Semitic evil. But whether we can be part of the solution, and whether in some of the things we say and in some of our policies, we can't help increase some of the security of Jews worldwide. Yossi, last word.
Last word. It's a very important distinction you've just raised. And maybe what we really need to think about, and this is especially relevant for the two of us as Israeli Americans or American Israelis, is there's one conversation on anti-Semitism that needs to happen in the diaspora, another conversation that needs to happen in Israel. In Israel, we need to ask ourselves, as a sovereign Jewish state, what do we need to do to help ease the predicament of diaspora Jews?
And it's not just telling them, come make Aliyah, because that, Jews aren't safe. That's just silly. It's like the old silly story.
You know what? Really, let's pat Israel on the back here for a moment, because you're not hearing that discourse in Israel.
That's correct. Thank God.
And so we're maturing. I think Israel in its relationship to the diaspora there's a certain maturing.
Thank you.
But it's also, yes, we have a responsibility for the diaspora. And here it gets tricky because the two of us, we hate the identification of Jews with victims. But Jews in the diaspora are a minority. And what American Jewry has discovered very uncomfortably, to its amazement and its shock, is that American Jewry since October 7th is a minority again.
Is a minority.
And Yossi, I feel that's what this is about.
As we're talking and we're having the last word, the last, I think we're just touching this subject. The whole issue.
So complicated.
It's important. Like this whole conversation now from an Israeli perspective might need its own episode. But in any event, my friend, it's wonderful to be with you.
Great to be with you.
This is Israel at War, day 606. And this is also, in many ways, the Jewish people feeling that they're at war. Not an easy time. Be well, everyone.